From the sports betting capital of the world, Las Vegas, it's time for the show you can't afford to miss. The #1 weekly football preview, Wanna Bet. Get ready for valuable information, analysis, winning picks, and betting strategies. Your hosts, SEC gridiron guru Kip Keefer, and award-winning betting expert, writer, and sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, Kip Keefer. Let's go. Here's everything you need to win big. Wanna Bet.
Welcome, everybody, to Wanna Bet from fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, more specifically from the Superbook, Westgate, Las Vegas, where Kip Keefer, Case Keefer, bringing you another edition of the show. We are in the middle of kind of a series of broadcasts each week where we're talking about the numbers game that's such a part of college football, such a part of professional football handicapping now. Case is one of the foremost experts on handicapping and wagering in the country. We are delighted to have his expertise on display for you, and hopefully you're picking up some information that help you win. Case, we left off last week talking about some of the more important numbers, the productivity per plays, the third down conversions. We got into kind of red zone discussion. As just a casual fan that's not really numbers oriented, you tend to remember key games from the schedule where the inefficiency in the red zone just kind of sticks with you. And the prime example of that, last year, Florida at Kentucky, the Gators had the ball inside the 10-yard line with just a minute left in the game and ran 9 plays based on penalties. They kept getting like resets, new set of downs because it was half the distance to the goal penalties. They ran 9 plays inside the 10-yard line and did not score. That kind of immediately brands that team as inefficient in the red zone. Is that a bad way to draw conclusions from one just awful example?
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation because really when something like that happens, there's 2 specific threads. Should they be judged for that? Absolutely. Can we make content about kind of making fun of them or saying how inefficient they were? Yes. I mean, there's no denying they were inefficient. However, how predictive is that going forward? And I think that's the most important analytics you want to use as a bettor. And luckily, a whole lot of the productivity things are more predictive than that. Like, yeah, we can say they're inefficient. We can say what the problems were. But is it predictive going forward? If they get down to the 10-yard line, again, in a future game and have 9 plays, how likely are they to score? They're still extremely likely. Aside from the fact that they didn't in this one instance, I don't necessarily think there's a lot of predictive value that happened to that. Congratulations to Kentucky. I don't remember that game especially well, but when I look at that game, I believe it would be one of those where you really look at the numbers that matter, and Florida's going to have put up a lot better numbers. Crazy things happen in a single football game. Kentucky won that day, probably didn't deserve to. If you look at the game going forward, what's going to be more predictive? That Kentucky's going to stay on this crazy stretch of having 9 stops inside the 10-yard line and win a 1-point game or whatever it is, or is it more likely that over time, Florida, the 90 yards they got to gain there is going to mean more than the last 10 yards they couldn't pick up? I tend to lean to the more predictive way, being getting down there is even more important.
Sure. Because statistically, that game was just insane. Florida outgained them like 4-1, had 3 times more first downs, just completely dominated the game. But it was kind of and I guess really kind of rounding into the question is, on the human factor, that game to me was kind of an indicator of how bad Florida was on fire, and it proved out the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly The hard thing to do with that is, and I totally agree with you, I mean, Florida last year was a disaster, a fire, and they shouldn't have been. I mean, the product on the field was pretty good. They had good players, but obviously there was a lot of turmoil with Dan Mullen going on. And then, so you can pick up on those things, and I'm not saying don't put those into your handicap. I just think that you also kind of usually are going to need a numbers backbone for that. I can't think of an exact example off my head, but I promise you there's been other occasions where a coach looks like he's under strife, that it's over. It's the team's rebelling against him, and then what happens? They bounce back. It's so hard to pinpoint exactly when this is going to happen. We look back now and we have confirmation bias on what happened with Florida, but I promise you there's coaches out there that have gone through rough stretches that we said, is this the guy? And they end up being great. I know this isn't a perfect example, but I still am kind of suspect of some of this guy's decision, but Georgia just won a national championship. Those first 2 years, Kirby Smart made a lot of questionable decisions. I didn't like a lot of his decisions. I'm sure there are some people wondering, is he the guy? Look what ends up happening. They bounce back. They blow everyone out. So I'm not saying there's no merit in that. There certainly is. I think it's just a lot harder than, the talking heads when we look back. It's a lot harder to pinpoint when is something going to totally go downhill because, yeah, that does happen. Things go downhill. But a lot of times teams will take off the other way, too. It's just a lot harder to identify, I think, than maybe we give it credit in hindsight.
Well, again, the numbers are going to play out over the long term, pretty much what the situation is. But you mentioned on a previous show when Billy Napier was at Louisiana Tech at first, or just at Louisiana. I'm sorry, he wasn't at Louisiana Tech.
The Ragin' Cajuns.
The Ragin' Cajuns. Sorry about my apologies. Louisiana, you said as his coaching career continued and he started to get better players, that he became more conservative in his approach. So I guess just to kind of wrap up this kind of train of thought, the numbers end up certainly reflecting that, do they not?
I think there is a school of thought that, everything that is in the numbers, it does kind of reflective on the coach. However, a way I'd be more willing to make an adjustment on a team, or like you've said in previous shows, I pick every game for Las Vegas Sun. LasVegasSun.com, you can find them in college football. But if I think a number is just about right on a game, just about perfect, but I think there's a huge coaching edge in one area, I'm more willing to make a bigger adjustment for that and take the better coach, because I think that does matter. And Napier's a great example. Just if I'm watching a game, and I actually had seen a lot of Louisiana games because I was high on the team a couple years ago. They played a lot of those Tuesday night Sun Belt games. If I see them consistently making decisions that are going to hurt their win probability, i.e. just the most famous one, my pet peeve, I think a lot of people's pet peeve is just punting when you're in plus territory, expected points territory. If you do something like that, it's more likely that if a game's close, if a line's close, I'm going to more likely be on the other team because I want a coach that's more pushing towards maximizing that win probability that's more aggressive. I know it's kind of sounds easy to narrow it down to aggressive versus conservative, but usually in football, in my opinion, the more aggressive choice is the right choice. And there's still a lot of coaches that totally do not adhere to that thinking. And those are the guys I'm more likely to downgrade and I'm more likely to ultimately bet against.
I have a friend who's very adept in his opinions and his knowledge of college football. And basically his betting approach in college football is kind of simplistic. He basically puts more emphasis on which team has the better quarterback than in that game. So from an individual, we've been talking about team statistics, but I'm sure there's breakdowns on player by player. So does someone's individual stats ever stand out and affect your opinion on games?
Certainly. I think looking at the players and what impact they have, makes a pretty big difference. It is hard to narrow down exactly how much it's worth. However, if there is a position to do that for, it's quarterback. That's obviously going to have the biggest effect on your team. But you have to look at everything. It's kind of tough just to narrow it down to quarterbacks. I hate to keep going back to Georgia, but they won the national championship last year. How many times would you have been betting against them down the stretch with Stetson Bennett, who you probably, by conventional wisdom, is worse than the vast majority of quarterbacks that he faced off with, at least in the big games. So, I don't think putting all that too much emphasis on one player is a lot, but, having a familiarity with the personnel is definitely an important thing.
And Stetson Bennett's back for his 15th season this year.
Absolutely.
The defending national championship quarterback. Again, the subject to me is so fascinating, and I guess to wrap this segment up, what comes first? Do you do the analysis on your numbers and then compare it to the line for that particular game, or do you start with the line and look for reasons why maybe it's right on target or maybe it's off?
Yeah, I try to come up with my own line, some of my own numbers, some of the available out there. Try to come up with my own numbers, then look at it to the line. If it's way off, I try to figure out why. If it's close, that's actually a little bit better, as I think I'm kind of on the same line. But then I can shade one way or the other.
Well, again, we're going to continue. We're going to at least have one more week of analytics. I have some more questions for Case, and I'm hoping that all of you are really getting a lot of good information out of this discussion. And speaking of information, Case's picks on college and pro football, his best bets of the week, are coming up next right here on Wanna Bet.
Hey, it's Kip Keefer again here for another week of my best bets on Wanna Bet, and don't know if I can quite top last week. All year I've kind of been moaning we haven't had that monster week, and finally it comes at the end. 9-1 across 10 plays last week if you include the two I gave out a few weeks earlier that just became official with the actual games. Last week, of course, that was TCU in the semifinal at +8, and Alabama, who we locked in at -3.5 in the Sugar Bowl. But 5-1 on college football, 4-0 on the NFL, and hey, at least the one miss was a big miss. I liked the under in Georgia, Ohio State. They almost doubled the total. It felt like not quite. It was 63, and they scored, I believe, 84 or something like that. So not great there, but hey, at the end of the day, we're going into one more game left on the college football slate, and we are at 30-25-1 on the show. Certainly not going to be buying any mansions or private islands with that, but that is a profitable season. I am happy with it, and I think it just goes to show a good gambling lesson. If you have a winning process, just stick with it, and eventually should pay off if you're doing the right things. Hopefully you followed some of the futures with me this year on college football. Maybe didn't give out as many winners as I'd like on the show, but if you followed my stuff at LasVegasSun.com, had a really nice year when you factor in the eking out a profit on the games plus all the futures. Of course, one final game remaining, Georgia and TCU in Los Angeles for the national championship. And one of those futures I think I mentioned it on the show a couple times. I didn't necessarily give it out, but I think on one of the opening segments, I talked about how Georgia at 4-1 was beginning to look attractive. Well, when they got to +450, I finally locked them in the preseason, wrote a column about it. So I am sitting on that bet here, have a really nice position on them to win the national championship. So whenever you have that, you're kind of tempted by the middle opportunities, and I have that chance here if I want to take TCU +13, which is the best priced available right now upon recording. There were some +14s earlier in the week, didn't jump on it though, and probably not going to jump on it unless it gets back to 14. I don't see the Horned Frogs having much for the Bulldogs here. I think this is going to be a pretty lopsided game. I've been wrong about TCU a lot this year. They've proven me wrong time and again, but I think Georgia is just better at almost every position. Not really playing their best end of the year, especially defensively, but I don't know. There's just not much that TCU does to scare me. What fun would it be if we went into the national championship without a bet? So one final bet on Wanna Bet for college football. I'm going to take Georgia -12 to finish the year. Hopefully can add one more win to our column. One other thing I wanted to touch on college football before we move on to the NFL, just the way I think you need to think of a gambler, especially if you want to dabble in futures as heavily as I do, is there is no offseason. You need to immediately be thinking about next year, which I already am. I can't wait to see some of these markets start opening up. Don't have any here yet in Nevada, but I was going to throw out a few teams that I'm going to be looking to target that I think could be on their way up next season. 3 power conferences, the Pac-12, ACC, and Big Ten. Let's start with the Pac-12, and it's a familiar face if you've listened to this segment all year. I believe we locked in Washington at 12-1 to win the conference kind of early in the season. It didn't work out, but hey, they lost one inexplicable game to Arizona State. If not for that, they're in the conference championship, and I think there's a good chance they win it. And next year, I think as of right this second, there's still a lot of transfer portal stuff to sort out. I think they would be my favorite in the Pac-12. Michael Penix coming back, Kalen DeBoer in his second year. I think he's the best coach in the nation no one talks about. Texas was awfully good by the end of the year, had a pretty full squad for their bowl game, and Washington won pretty easily. I love the momentum of this program, the trajectory. I'm really going to be looking for the Huskies to win the Big 12, going to get all the exposure I can on them. I especially think they'll be underpriced early, so I'm looking at Washington in the Pac-12. In the ACC, I think this is the year Florida State finally comes out back on top next year. They have so much production coming back. I was surprised. I think it's a big deal that Jordan Travis is coming back at quarterback. I really like Florida State in the ACC if you're looking towards next year. And in the Big Ten, how about Wisconsin? I feel like this program has been a sleeping giant for a long time. They have all the resources. They were just kind of playing an archaic style. I felt like, really they could find the right guy to bring them into the new century, so to speak. I don't even think that's an overstatement how they played, and I think they might have found it in Luke Fickell, and especially because he hired Phil Longo as offensive coordinator, who brought in Tanner Mordecai, who I've talked about on the show before, from SMU to be their quarterback next year. I'll be borderline shocked if Wisconsin doesn't at least win their division next year. Longo leaving, I think, is a big hit for North Carolina. I was going to be making Drake May my Heisman favorite. That was a guy I was going to target in the Heisman Trophy market next year. Now without Longo and Chip Lindsey going in with the Tar Heels, I'm not so sure about that anymore. But maybe now you look at Mordecai as a long shot price. I'd probably want better than 50-1, but I think Wisconsin's going to be really good next year. I think they're going to have a shot to do something. So Wisconsin, Florida State, and Washington, looking ahead to next year. Three, I wouldn't say sleepers, but three teams I would be looking at bigger things for. Let's go on to the NFL, where for the year, a little bit better than college football now on the show, 33-21-4. Pretty outstanding. That's a high clip to try to maintain through the playoffs. The lines are getting pretty tight, but let's do the best we can. 3 plays for Week 18. We'll start, hopefully you're hearing this Saturday morning when it runs, because I'm going to get with a game on Saturday here in Las Vegas. The Chiefs coming out to the Raiders, and it looks like with the tragic events that unfolded in Cincinnati with Damar Hamlin, of course, thoughts go out to him. Heartbreaking, really tough to watch, but and there's no really way to segue into this, but because of all that, it really looks like the Chiefs are in position to get the number 1 seed in the AFC playoffs, and I just can't see with that on the line, them not rolling here in Las Vegas. The Raiders had this great one-off performance with Jarrett Stidham stepping in at quarterback. I don't necessarily think they're going to be able to hold on to that too much going forward. I am around the team a lot, as I've said, and I've kind of had some insight in how they're going to play. I wouldn't say that they're mailing it in or they're not focused for this game. It seems like they certainly want to go out on a high, but I just think with the Chiefs having more to play for, it's kind of a weird vibe around the Raiders. They're feeling good, even though they lost to the 49ers last week. I think they might just get rolled over by Kansas City here. So it's back up to 9.5 today. Unfortunately, I bet it at 7.5, but I wouldn't mind laying the 9.5 with the Chiefs against the Raiders Saturday afternoon. 2 more games. How about Cleveland +3 against the Steelers, still alive in the playoffs? I just don't get this Steelers team. I don't think they're very good. I think they're overrated. Winning all these close games to somehow, now you hear all the, Kenny Pickett's looking so good for a rookie. He's been kind of mediocre to me. Mike Tomlin never had a losing record. A lot of that's randomness, and I think it runs out here. I think Cleveland's defense playing so much better. I think they're going to have the Steelers' offense is going to have their hands full with Myles Garrett. 3 points, too many. I think the Browns win outright. It's going to be Cleveland +3. And then the final game of the year, same thing I said about college football. What fun is it if you don't have a bet on the final game? Detroit at Green Bay on Sunday Night Football. And unfortunately, this game could mean nothing to Detroit. They could be eliminated by then. But, just statistically, there's not that much difference between these two teams. I know Green Bay's red hot, but a spread of 4.5 seems like way too much to me here. Maybe the Lions get lucky and the Rams upset the Seahawks earlier in the day and they're playing for something. But even if they're not, I think they're going to want to beat the Packers. This offense has been really dynamic, and the defense has been better in spurts. So 4.5, too many points for me. Give me Detroit +4.5 to go with Cleveland +3 and Kansas City -9.5. Again, always looking for the betting angle, but don't want to take away how much the seriousness of what happened this past week in the NFL, and hoping everything is well with Hamlin. Stick around for Kip's picks next on the national championship game. This is Case on Wanna Bet.
Hey everybody, it's Kip Keefer. On all of our shows, we're in the business of picking winners, but selecting the champions of real estate, particularly downtown, well, that's easy. It's Lita D'Imperio and Carrie Smith, the dream team at Realty South. 205-937-2232 is the phone number to call if you want to get in the game of fabulous downtown living.
Kip Keefer back now for our SEC segment. And there's only one SEC team still playing football right now, and it is in the national championship game on Monday night out in Los Angeles. And the fact that the Georgia Bulldogs will be lining up against TCU is kind of miraculous if you watched the game last week. Georgia coming from all kinds of adversity and sloppy play and lack of execution, and somehow, some way, coming all the way back from a 17-point deficit in the fourth quarter to beat the Buckeyes, really shock Ohio State in a game that was different than a lot of people envisioned. The first thing that comes to mind when looking back on Georgia-Ohio State was the complete transformation of the game of quarterback C.J. Stroud, who became a real threat with his legs, and this has not been typical of Ohio State football in the last couple of seasons. Stroud showed a lot more athleticism and savvy than he had in his previous almost 2 years of play for the Buckeyes. Stroud hurt Georgia repeatedly by keeping plays alive, particularly in the first half, and improvising with the great receiver Marvin Harrison Jr., and Georgia really had no answer. A lot of people were criticizing the Georgia defensive secondary on social media and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is, no secondary is going to hold up if a quarterback has so much time. Now, on the other hand, a lot of people are arguing the Pac-12 crew that was in charge of that game from an officiating standpoint did let's just call it what they're saying, a really lousy job of keeping the Ohio State offensive line in check. Georgia with intense defensive pressure, which is their MO. Just ask Hendon Hooker, the Tennessee quarterback, and that's why the Volunteers are chilling at their TV set tonight instead of participating in this game. Georgia completely overwhelmed the Tennessee offensive line and Hendon Hooker and took Tennessee completely out of what they wanted to do. They had 4 sacks in the game against Stroud, but they didn't get to him very often because of Stroud's elusiveness and because a lot of people who are breaking this game down said Ohio State's offensive line got away with blatant holding on the Georgia defenders, the Georgia pass rushers, and whether that's true or not, it's just kind of the way the game evolves. Sometimes you have to get into the pattern of adjusting to the officials, and if they're really calling the game loosely and letting the other team get away with some things, you have to make that adjustment, and Georgia just didn't seem to be able to do it. Plus, the Georgia defensive coaches, including head coach Kirby Smart, whose fingerprints are all over that defense, kind of conceded the fact that if Stroud wants to take off and run, so be it. They never really made the adjustment to stop that, didn't spy him at all in the second half when he really started hurting them with some runs forward. The first half, it was more keeping plays alive. The second half, he became the primary offensive weapon, especially after Harrison, the great receiver, went down with concussion protocol. So the bottom line is Georgia allowed Stroud to pretty much run, gambling that eventually that pipeline of success for Ohio State would run out, and it almost cost them the game because after Georgia stormed down the field and scored the late touchdown with less than a minute to go, they left 50 seconds on the clock for Ohio State, and really the only significant gains on that drive, which set up a possible game-winning field goal for the Buckeyes, was Stroud taking off right down the middle for a 27-yard run down to the Georgia 31. And, of course, we know what happened next. Noah Ruggles, the reliable field goal kicker for Ohio State, could not really handle the moment. He way overswung and yanked the ball. Anybody who plays golf will have that sensation of swinging too hard and trying to make too brisk of contact and really yanking your shot, in this case field goal, far to the left. It was no good from the time it left his toe. No drama at all of barely missing or not getting there. Plenty of leg, but completely yanked, and that was what ended the game. But it was set up again by a Stroud scramble, and Georgia really kind of rolled the dice there of not making allowances when Stroud was really hurting them in the second half. Now, I say all this because Georgia did survive in that game by 1 point in a wild finish. A lot of touchdowns in the fourth quarter, including Stetson Bennett's bomb to Arian Smith when the Ohio State defender fell down, and then the game winner to A.D. Mitchell, who has not played all season. We've mentioned him several times here on the show. And if he came back, that was going to be a major factor for the Dogs. Now, apparently they've lost Big Darnell Washington for the TCU championship game in L.A. That is a huge blow, not even from the receiving standpoint, where Washington's excellent, but it's his blocking, both on the line and downfield. He is just a bulldozer that creates a lot of room for Georgia ball carriers and receivers. And with him out of the lineup, that is a big factor to weaken that Georgia offense. Against TCU, they cannot have the plan of hoping that Max Duggan doesn't hurt them, because if they ignore him, the TCU quarterback, he is going to inflict major damage, and Georgia has to avoid that in this game to have any chance. Duggan is so much the key for everything TCU wants to do. He's a big guy, very good athlete, very, very nimble and smart with the football, and he can really hurt you with scrambles and keeping plays alive and certainly taking off and running. And the Georgia defense is going to have to account for him much more efficiently than they did against Stroud and Ohio State. On the other side of the ball, the Georgia offense should have their way with TCU's defense, which is the weak part of that team. They're scrappy and they play well, and they found a way all season to win games, but they give up a lot of yards and a lot of points. Michigan should just be having trouble sleeping at night because they threw away so many opportunities. 2 pick sixes by the TCU defense and 2 stops from the 2-yard line, one on a stupid trick play call that Michigan ran that ended up being a 4th down turnover, and the other, after apparently scoring and the officials marking the ball short, they fumbled right into the end zone the next time from inside the 1-yard line. So Michigan left so many opportunities on the table, and that was what the determining factor was, as TCU desperately held on and beat the Wolverines, as we predicted here on Wanna Bet. So Georgia TCU, the spread is 13. That's an awful lot, but Georgia's already had their severe test. I think they're going to score a lot of points against TCU and make this one comfortable. I like Georgia to win by multiple touchdowns. Therefore, take the Dogs in the national championship game, as Kirby Smart will hoist the trophy for the 2nd consecutive year. That's it. Enjoy the championship game. We will talk to you very soon. I'm Kip Keefer. Go Dogs at SEC football, and thank you all for watching Wanna Bet.